Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone. Let us begin with a small prayer. Sarvatma sarvadrugyosau sarvadhyasa nirasakritu satatam sannidhattam me hridaye paramashivah sutra bhashya pranetaro vedantabja prabhakaro vande parasparatmano badarayana shankaro. We welcome to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. Today, it is session 2 of Weekend with Wisdom, wherein Kathirasan Ji is speaking on the Advaita Vedanta of Shiva Samhita. We welcome you. Kathirasan Ji yesterday spoke about the basic concepts that are explored in the Shiva Samhita. He took us through the critical editions, how the Shiva Samhita has been brought out, what are the chapters, what do they speak about, and so on and so forth. He also explained about 2 initial verses of the Shiva Samhita. Today he'll be continuing again. Viewers, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box and not in chat box. Kathirasan Ji will be taking towards the end of the session. Kathirasan Ji, please start your session.
Thank you, Manuji. And namaste, everyone. Om Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Namaste, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of my presentation. And today, those of you who attended yesterday, you would know what the topic is and what I've shared thus far. Today, I'm going to continue on from where I left off yesterday. And Manuji has already shared briefly what I shared yesterday. So today's session 2. Now I'm going to continue to share with you the verses, especially the verses from chapter 1 and perhaps a little more from the other chapters. But primarily, the focus will be on chapter 1. So yesterday we looked at a very short very few verses rather from the first chapter, the first few verses, which shared the Siddhanta of the Shiva Samhita, which happens to be the Siddhanta of Advaita Vedanta, which is very much the teaching of the Upanishads. And then we looked at the authority. Where does it draw its authority? You can see that much like the other tantras, it takes the authority of God or Ishvara, so which is of course Shiva in this case. And the other thing that we saw is the competency or the eligibility of the Sikha or the Sadhaka, which was also mentioned in the verse that revealed the authority of the text. Okay, so with that now, let's move on. So today we're going to look at the next section of this chapter, which talks about the ineffective sadhanas. Now, what are ineffective sadhanas? So these are a category of sadhanas that are not effective in conferring mukti or conferring moksha. I use the word conferring very, very cautiously because many of us may know that in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, moksha or mukti is not something that is created. It is actually what we call as accomplishing the accomplished, praptasya praptihi, meaning that you are already free, but you're discovering this through the means that are employed using Shastra or text or scriptures. So therefore, there are the sadhanas other than the jnana sadhana or the sadhana that is employed using knowledge. And now every other sadhana is considered to be ineffective because they do not lead you to moksha directly. So let us look at that. Now, this is also very interesting because you don't find such a list in many texts in the Advaita Vedanta literature, because many a time what we find is a very, very emphatic conclusion that is there in most Advaita Vedanta literature, which is karma is not effective in conferring mukti. All right, so that is very, very popularly stated. It's like as a conclusion. And then, but it is not elaborated or listed as to what are these karmas that are not effective. But here in the Shiva Samhita, it is listed. Many sadhanas are listed that is emphatically stated to be ineffective. So let's look at that. So here you can see in verse 4 of the first chapter. Now, very interesting. You can see that a couple of sadhanas or values are mentioned here. So satyam, tapaha, shaucham, kshama, and arjavam, shama, etc. All of them are considered to be not effective. And it's very interesting because the choice of these values and karmas are very interesting because these are yamas. Sometimes they're also categorized as yamas, meaning fundamental values. So satyam always is what you call it takes a very high priority in the list of values because everything else depends on satyam. So here you can see satyam is stated first, and he stated that this satyam cannot lead you to moksha or mukti. So therefore it is ineffective, this value. And tapaha, austerity, purity or cleanliness, forgiveness, which is kshama, and then shama, which is tranquility, calmness, and then straightforwardness. Now, all of these yamas are actually ineffective. And in that sense, the Shiva Samhita is very direct. It doesn't mince words. Now, on the other hand, we all know that these values are important. Now, we need to be very clear that in the Vedic traditions, there are two distinct lifestyles. Now, that is actually now implied in the Shiva Samhita, because the Shiva Samhita clearly distinguishes these two lifestyles, but it doesn't mention it explicitly. But you can see that distinction presented here. And this distinction is not something new to the Advaita Vedanta literature, because you can find this distinction, of course, in the whole Vedic tradition, because there's Karma Kanda and Nyanakanda, which I'm going to talk about later, because the Shiva Samhita talks about it. And there is also these very ancient terms that are used for these two lifestyles or traditions, which is called Nishrayasa and Abhyudaya. And these two, what I call goals that are set. Nishrayasa means moksha or mukti. Abhyudaya means the pursuit of dharma, artha, and kama, which is the mainstream life, or what is called as pravritti dharma lakshanam. So this is presented very clearly in the commentary by Shankara on the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya. So in the Upodgata, that means the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya by Shankara, he makes this very, very clear. Shankara makes a great attempt there to make this very clear to the person who is actually studying the Bhagavad Gita and his Bhashya. So he makes it very clear that two dharmas in the tradition. One is called Pravritti Dharma and the other one is called Nivritti Dharma. And these two traditions are like darkness and light, as you can see that in the Upanishads. Most of the time, it's very, very stated very clearly. They are two incompatible traditions. So I want to talk a little about this so that we look at these verses in the right context. So the Nivritti Dharma, which is the dharma of sannyasa, or the path or lifestyle that uses jnana directly as a means to moksha. And then Pravritti Dharma, which does not employ jnana, but it employs karma, because the purpose of the karma is to secure artha and kama with dharma as the foundation. So you can see that these two traditions are opposing in that sense. They are incompatible. And Shankara makes that very clearly. In fact, he even denies that these two can be practiced together, which is called jnana karma samuchayavada. He even demolishes that is even remotely even possible. And of course, Sureshwaracharya, his disciple, takes this up very, very well in his Naishkrimya Siddhi. So we need to be very, very clear that when these values are denied, now these are denied in the context of them being part of Pravritti Dharma. So there is actually a krama, meaning there is a sequence. That means everyone by default first practices the dharma called Pravritti Dharma, which is the dharma for everyone, the lifestyle for everyone. So it's like for the common man. All of us have to live a life observing certain fundamental values, which is considered, or which is what we are seeing on the screen right now. So that is required for everyone as a common man. And then after practicing all of this, maybe in this life or maybe in future life, we develop vairagya, dispassion towards all of this. And that's when a person moves into Nivritti Dharma after renouncing karma. So this particular structure is very much intact in the Shiva Samhita. So when the Shiva Samhita is denying the ineffective of this particular values, it is doing it from the standpoint of Nivritti Dharma. Not that these values are completely not valuable. It is not valuable to the person in Nivritti Dharma, but they still continue to be of utmost value to the people in Pravritti Dharma. That means the majority of the population, which is probably 99.99% of the population, would still need these values, would still very much required for their living, for their effective living, all right, from day to day, in day-to-day life. But for the person in Nivritti Dharma, these what I call these values are not important anymore. And do you know why? Because they have already observed and have developed Vairagya. So this is how we see the denial or the emphatic conclusion that these values are not valuable. And the Shastra here, the Shiva Samhita, continues on. All right, here you see that Satyam, truth, and austerities, and purity, forgiveness, tranquility, straightforwardness are all denied to be ineffective. It continues on to reveal some more. Now take a look at this. It says further, the whole idea of charity, all right, being charitable, you know, dhanam, which is a very important dharma for the people in Pravritti Dharma, people who are the common man. All right, dhanam, Pitrakarma means the rituals that are done for the deceased ancestors, and rituals here. And even Vairagya is very interesting, right? Karma and Vairagya also has been denied. Why? Because this is a very key point. I just mentioned that after the rise of Vairagya, then a person moves from the Pravritti Dharma, the common life, the common day-to-day man's life, and then he or she moves into the life of sannyasa, which is Nivritti Dharma. Now, but Vairagya on its own is not helpful, because you can have the Vairagya, but you may take a different path, right? So Vairagya doesn't guarantee that you would actually take to the right path, or the path that is conducive to moksha or mukti. Now, a good example in the tradition of the Veda is Buddha, right? Buddha had Vairagya. That's the reason why he left the palace. But just because he had Vairagya did not allow him to discover the path that was presented in the Upanishads. So with all due respects to Buddha, we see that Buddha obviously is a great Mahatma, but when we look at it in the context of just Vairagya alone, that doesn't guarantee that you would be taking to the right path. When I use the word right path, I'm talking about the effective path in trying to know that the self is Brahman, the self is without beginning, without end, etc., which we saw in the first verse. So therefore, again, Shiva Samhita makes it it's a very bold statement, in my opinion, where it denies the value of charity, dhanam, and pitrikarma, the rituals for the deceased ancestors, and karmas, all rituals, and even vairagya. They are ineffective by itself, by themselves, for the person in Nivritti Dharma. And then it goes on. Now look at this. So it further continues the list. So here it talks about grihastha karma. Grihastha karma means the rituals that are performed by the householder. A householder here means a person who's married and has a home, and maybe have children, and maybe grandchildren eventually, and they have property, etc. So as a householder, there are particular karmas that are mandated by the Dharma Shastra, or depends on your varna as well. Depending on your varna, you have certain karmas. And of course, popularly, the grahastha karma, the karma of the householder, is defined as the Panchamaha Yajna that we know, that is very popularly practiced, all right, by people. So this set of karmas are denied to be effective. It's there. And then next one that is here is the Agnihotra. So we all know that Agnihotra is one of the most ancient daily observances, all right, that are required, and is a Nitya Agni that continues on in the life of a person, especially a person who is perhaps is a Brahmana or even a Dvija. All right, so these two categories, who fall into these two categories may continue to honor the Agnihotra, although today we don't have that many people anymore who are doing the Agnihotra. Maybe at the time of this, at the time where this text was put together, perhaps Agnihotra was still very relevant and still current. People were perhaps still practicing it. So therefore, the Shiva Samhita denies the validity of the Grihastha karma, which is the duties of the householder, and then the Agnihotra. Again, I want to caution that this is only from the context of the Nivritti Dharma, not that it is absolutely invalid. In fact, it is still valid for 99.99% of people in the world. And then it goes on to reveal a little more. Here you can see that in this next verse, it talks about also mantra yoga. And tirtha, tirthanusevanam, tirthanusevanam, very nice, two important words that are very popular practices, right? It says mantra yoga. Mantra yoga here literally means the whole sadhana that involves mantra, chanting. You can consider this as, people, what is called a swadhyaya, right? Chanting the Veda of your shaka, or even doing perhaps japa, or just the whole idea of chanting stotras and stutis and all of that. Now, all of that fall under the category of mantra yoga. Now, mantra yoga also happens to be sometimes one of the limbs of tantra, or even hatha yoga. Sometimes it is also mentioned. So the mantra yoga is denied. The whole what I call sadhana that revolves around vak. So as you know, that karma can be done kayika, vachika, and manasa. So mantra yoga is a kind of karma that is done as a vachika actually karma. So there's also manasa, kayika, and this is vachika karma. So the one that is done through verbal disciplines. Now, all of them are ineffective. Now, this is also very interesting, right? Because in today, in many traditions of Advaita Vedanta, people continue to do chanting and all of that. So why are these being done, right? So this can be resolved through by recognizing the other lifestyle, which is karma yoga. So all of these sadhanas that we just shared, all of them are valuable only from the context of karma yoga. Otherwise, they are considered to be invalid from the Navrati Dharma perspective. So here, even the pilgrimage, or the tirtham that people tend to go to, different temples or different important, sites in India, which is obviously a place of punya, the punya bhumi, where people tend to travel. Even the diaspora, people travel to all of these places because they are great pilgrimage sites that confer a lot of blessings and anugrah, which we cannot deny. But here, as far as the pursuit of moksha is concerned, they are considered to be invalid, all right, including the pilgrimage. So next is, so this is also another point, right? So sometimes I want to add on. Now, going to an ashram and staying is also a pilgrimage, right? From the context of Shiva Samhita. So it is also denied. Just because you go to an ashram and just because you sit in a congregation where someone is teaching, that doesn't guarantee you that you are going to attain moksha. So it's a great learning, actually, because some of us may go to all of these ashrams for different reasons. Some of us go there for reasons other than the direct what I call pursuit of moksha. There could be other factors that could be influencing why we are there. So it's very important that when we see verses like this, that we should ask and inquire into our intentions. Why are we there? Are we there because of other reasons other than the pursuit of moksha, which is the employment of jnana with the teacher, Shravana, and that's why we are in the ashram? And for us to also do manana and nididhyasana, or are we there for a different reason? Or are we thinking that this is like a retreat, for me to work very hard in my office, toiling away with all the tasks, and then I want to go to a retreat and take a break? Oh, really? So is the pursuit of jnana taking a break? Now, it's a good question to really reflect on, because many of us may possibly have a different intention other than the intention of only wanting moksha or mukti. So this is what the Shiva Samhita could possibly teach us. The intentions, why we are doing what we are doing. All right. So this is pilgrimage can also include the what we call our trip to ashrams and other retreat centers to learn. But the question now is, why am I there? What's my true intention for being there? Now, when we inquire into that, we can learn more. And this is a good verse for us to think about that as well. And then the verse continues. So here it says that, very important verse. It says that although, you can take some time to read this as well. The translation says that, like, thus people abiding in the world, in this loka, not knowing what to be done and what not to be done, meaning that they're confused, though become free from demeritorious actions, which is basically papa karma, nonetheless deluded only. So what does this mean? Now, what this means is that although these karmas or these values that we just spoke about, right, in the previous verses, although they can remove what you call help us to remove papa, right? Because it helps us, because all of these observances actually help us to reduce the papa or remove the papa. It helps us to do that, to be free from that papa, from the papa that we have possibly done in the previous lives or in the past. Now, all of that can be actually be freed from when you do the karmas. However, now the Shastra qualifies further. Although it frees you from the papa, that does not guarantee that you will be completely free in that sense of mukti. So therefore, it takes the view that actually the nice line, vyamohameva gacchanti, that means it says that actually you are still deluded. Because why? Because the people who are doing these karmas, they think that this is the end. There is nothing more. All that I need to do is just this. So from the standpoint of Navrati Dharma, so I want to emphasize the context, because the context cannot be lost here. These verses are being presented from the standpoint of Navrati Dharma, the person who wants moksha and has renounced actions. From that person's perspective, this is to say that the performance of karmas have no value whatsoever the moment you have renounced all actions. All right, so that is what is being presented. Now, I also want to share that a little later we'll talk about karma yoga, which is a very important discipline that connects the pravritti dharma to nivriti dharma. So there's pravritti dharma, the life of the common man, and then there's nivriti dharma, the lifestyle of a person who wants moksha, and literally a sannyasi traditionally. And then there is one more that connects the two, which is called karma yoga, which we'll talk about a little later. And in the karma yoga, all of this would still be observed, but it's observed with a different attitude, which we'll talk about later. So, and then the Shiva Samhita concludes this particular section by saying something very, very interesting. Now, look at this verse, take some time to read it. So here you can see that the people who are following these sadhanas that we spoke about, all right, so it says that people who follow these sadhanas, because they have their own beliefs, right, because they believe that these are all effective, and therefore they do it, they perform these sadhanas and they observe the values. He says that when you observe all of this, now what happens is it contributes to birth and death. That's why you can see here, nice line, Janma Mrityu Paramparam. The Janma Mrityu Paramparam means it's successive. That means birth, Janma Mrityu, Janma Mrityu, Janma Mrityu, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. So because why this happens is because of Brahma. Brahma here means with the bha, take note, error or delusion. Because of that delusion, all right, it's still there, because these karmas do not remove Brahma. A very interesting point that the Shiva Samhita makes, because these karmas or values are on the premise of Brahma. That means that the delusion is there while you're performing these karmas and observing the values. Therefore, it cannot destroy birth and death. Instead, it perpetuates birth and death. So therefore, the Shiva Samhita concludes this section by making this statement. So it's giving a reason. Why? Because it is on the premise of Brahma, error, delusion, and therefore it continues to create Janma and Mrityu, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. And when we adhere to these doctrines, right, because that means it comes from a belief that these are valuable, it will never get us out of this Brahma. It perpetuates it. So a very, very strong statement, and another bold conclusion that the Shiva Samhita makes here, that that because of the punya and papa that is generated, so the punya and papa are generated due to the karmas, because whenever we do good karma, right karma, it generates punya, which is merit. And then whenever we do karma that is not wholesome or not good, not right, then it generates papa, which is demerit. Now, when because of merit and demerit, we keep on obtaining birth after birth after birth after birth. Having said that, let me now I'm going to now share a couple of other points before we come back to this point. Now, this birth and death, birth and death, and birth and death, is it really a problem? Now, this is a very good question to think about, because this is what the whole Advaita Vedanta tradition is built on. Now, the birth and death is not a problem until we find it to be a problem. So this is a very key point that we need to see. The birth and death by default is not a problem at all, because the mainstream people, the audience or the common man, 99.99% of the world, now for them, this birth and death is not a problem. Why? Because it can be also positive, right? Because a new birth can give me a new experience. Why is it a problem? What happens if I get born into a very wealthy family? Or maybe I'm born into a family with illustrious scholars, panditas. Or maybe I'm born into a family of very, very respected people, officials, or even leaders. Now, what's the problem in having a birth like that? So this whole problem of Brahma, of seeing that this whole birth and death is a problem, or this papa punya is a problem, is only for a very unique set of people. That is why you can see in the Upanishad, this point is repeated again and again. It comes. And Shankara makes a very, very interesting observation in the Bhagavad Gita introduction. All right, that's one, in his commentary to the Bhagavad Gita introduction, and also in the Katha Upanishad introduction. He makes a very interesting point. The seeker of this knowledge is a unique seeker. Why is he or she unique? He or she is unique because for this person, there is a sense of vairagya that has emerged towards this whole process of birth and death and punya and papa. So for the person who is then taking the path of Navrati Dharma, now that person has developed vairagya even towards punya. And that's the definition of vairagya anyway, right? So that vairagya, that means there is no anticipation or even a kind of a disposition. I use the word disposition very, very mindfully. All right, the disposition of actually not wanting favorable situations is there. All right, that means the person is not looking for favorable situation. The person is also not looking for unfavorable, obviously. So the person is not looking for that anymore, and therefore becomes a qualified person. So this key point has to be mentioned. So what I'm trying to say is that this birth and death is not a problem for many people. So if it is not a problem for many people, then why create that and make that a problem for those people? Because for them, this life is okay. And these are the people who are very, very important in our life, because they are the one who innovate great products like, smartphones, great devices like laptops, social media, and all of the experiences that people are enjoying are created by these people who will be born again, and they will continue to contribute to the world through their karmas, etc. Either shastrokta karmas or even vyavaharika karmas for laukika karmas. So all of that is actually important. So therefore, we need to understand again that the Shiva Samhita is very clear. It is pitching this. It is teaching all of this to that unique seeker, or what we call as a unique adhikari, vishesha adhikari, all right, vishishta adhikari. So this itself is mentioned by Shankara. Shankara takes this view as well. And he even mentions there are two traditions itself, two rishi traditions for each of these dharmas, the pravritti and the nivritti. There are two dharmas. So these two dharmas tell us that it is meant for the unique seeker, right? Each seeker, depending on their disposition, if there is a presence of vairagya, then they take the nivritti dharma, the tradition. And those of them who don't have vairagya, which is the common man, they take the pravritti dharma tradition. So this has to be seen in the context. Now, coming back to the verse where it says that, this whole karma is invaluable. Now, this idea that karma is invaluable is also found, as you would already know, in Mundaka Upanishad. It comes up. It also comes up in Kaivalya Upanishad, Nakarmana, etc., the mantra, all of that is there. And it comes repeatedly. All right, in the Upanishad, it occurs in many, almost you can see that the premise or is either implicit or explicit in all the Mukhya Upanishads. So, however, we need to be very clear that while karmas are not okay, right, then there is another one, karma yoga, which we'll talk about later. So these karmas, however, can be performed with a particular attitude. However, like for example, just as this is my guess, all right, my guess. Now, as you are listening to these lectures right now, how many of you is a sannyasi? Right? It's a good question, because this text is pitched at a sannyasi, pitched for a sannyasi, all right? A person who has renounced. So you may not be a sannyasi. Then how do you make these teachings valuable to you? Now, this is where karma yoga comes. So karma yoga therefore comes as a lifestyle for the person who lives the life of pravritti yet wanting moksha. And therefore, karma yoga comes. So in karma yoga, you may be performing these very same karmas that are denied for its invalidity. All right. But this time, you're going to perform it with a different attitude so that you can have one important goal, which is the purification of the mind, which is called chitta shuddhi or antakarana shuddhi, that takes place. Now, when the mental purification takes place, then you become eligible for the realization of the knowledge that is being taught, all right, which we'll talk about a little later. So now there is one other thing that I want to point out. Now, did you notice that none of the sadhanas that are mentioned here are hatha yoga sadhanas? Very interestingly, the author has left out hatha yoga sadhanas. There is no mudra, there is no pranayama, there is no pratyahara, and there is no shatkarma, there is no asana, right? It is all not here. Interesting. So this also tells us that when this text was possibly written or compiled, the person who was doing this, the author or the compiler, was very mindful and very aware that if he had included those hatha yoga sadhanas in here, then it will completely deny the validity of the shastra itself. So that could be one possibility, that this has been left out. The hatha yoga sadhanas have been left out. But to be very honest, the hatha yoga sadhanas also fall in this category because they are all karmas. Can you see that? They are all karmas. But there is one difference. We also need to recognize that the hatha yoga sadhanas were primarily also taught for a sannyasi. This is something that we need to recognize as well. The hatha yoga sadhanas in the early hatha yoga shastras, you can find maybe, if I get this right, it probably pre-14th century or pre-15th century, all right? Hatha yoga shastras primarily were taught to sannyasis. So that also tells us why perhaps it was not mentioned here, because the text is itself teaching sannyasis. Although towards the end, it's going to change, it's going to shift its gear and look at grahasthas and how grahasthas can also take advantage of this with a particular attitude. So this is something very interesting, that the hatha yoga sadhanas are left out at this point in time, especially in chapter 1. Now imagine if I place the hatha yoga sadhanas in chapter 1, people are not going to read chapter 2 onwards. Can you see that? It's very interesting that it doesn't come out at the early part of the text. So with that, now that we have the Shiva Samhita has demolished the validity of ineffective sadhanas. These sadhanas are all ineffective in actually conferring mukti. Now, next, how about the erroneous darshanas? So some of you may know, darshana here could be called as a philosophy. So earlier, they were sadhanas, and that includes values as well. So now that the values and sadhanas have been demolished, now the next step that the Shiva Samhita takes is to point out philosophies, all right, philosophies that are also erroneous. Now it points out one by one. This is going to get interesting, right? Because now it's going to point out one by one. So before I unfold this, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, we don't have a systematic exposition of the darshanas except for the Sarva Darshana Sara Sangraha by Vidyaranya Muni. So we have that particular text. So that is the only text that perhaps we have where a systematic refutation, all right, of different philosophies take place. So in the Sarva Darshana Sara Sangraha, I think that's what it's called, I believe, it was, or something of that sort, where Swami Vidyaranya really presents each of the philosophies, and then he refutes it. Now, apart from that, you find the refutation of the darshanas not systematic in that sense. However, the refutation of the darshanas take place in the commentaries. But what I'm saying is that they are not like systematic in the sense that now here is yoga, now here is Sankhya, now here is Nyaya, and then let's talk about the philosophy and then let's refute. But instead, it happens what I call as something that is emergent. Emergent meaning that when Shankara is commenting on a particular mantra or a particular sutra or a particular shloka, then he evokes a teaching of a particular darshana and then he refutes it. And this especially takes place more than anywhere else than in the Brahma Sutra Bhashyam of Shankara that takes place. So let's now look at what the Shiva Samhita says about these erroneous darshanas. And there is a very strong word that the Shiva Samhita uses. It says these people who give, who provide, who teach these darshanas basically fall in the category of Mukti Marga Bahishkritaha. It says that means these are people who deviate from the Mukti Marga. All right, they deviate from the Mukti Marga. So it's very clear. The author in the Shiva Samhita is very clear. There is something called Mukti Marga. It is not saying that it is, anything is also okay. No, it doesn't say there is a Mukti Marga and there is a Mukti Marga, and it's very defined. And that is what it's called here in this Shiva Samhita as yoga. All right, we saw Yoga Shastram, it says. And it says that very clearly. And also, because it's presenting darshanas, that means at the time of this, at the time of the author or the time of the Shastrakara of the Shiva Samhita, this must have had become well-established traditions. That means these are traditions still current at the time of the text composition or compilation. All right, so therefore he is presenting it and he's refuting it very, very briefly. But I must say it is not a dialectical process, meaning that he's not going to explain what is this the darshana and then what does it say, what is wrong about it, and then he demolishes. He doesn't do that. He just mentions very, very briefly, and then he says they are all erroneous in that sense. They're not effective. So let's look at them right now. So here you can see that in the verse 10, it says very, very interesting point. He says, the people who are actually teaching this erroneous darshanas, he says, could be people who are very much familiar with the Shastras, especially here it says, uses the word Shruti. So it says these people who are perhaps very intelligent as well, right? They are very intelligent. He says, you can see the first nice the verse, Anjari Matimatam Shreshtaihi. It says very, very beautiful, right? So they're not stupid people. They're not ignorant people. They're very intelligent. It takes the position that these people are very intelligent. So they are not to be disrespected in that sense. So this is a very important point, right? So they're not to be disrespected. They're not to be frowned upon in that sense because they are intelligent. They are respectable people. And they are very much familiar and also very well versed in the Veda. So a lot of people. And look at that. And then he says that this Atman that is eternal has been revealed as many. Can you see that? It is revealed as many. So these people that he says very intelligent and know the Vedas as well, they tend to reveal the Atman as many. So this is the first group or darshana that is presented here. Those people who present the Atman, the self to be many, not one. Because in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, there is only Atma. I can't say there is one Atma, right? There is only Atma. That's all there is. To say one Atma, we get into the trouble, right? That's why the Chandogya Upanishad says, Ekam Eva, right? One only, but Advitiyam, without a second. The without a second is a very important point. The moment you put without a second, the one vanishes because there is only Atma that exists. So very important point that we need to see. All right. So here it says that the first darshana, it says that people who teach many different, that there are many different selves. So this automatically qualifies a few darshana in this category. Number one, we all know Patanjali Yoga could qualify in this category because it uses Sankhya. So therefore, Sankhya is qualified. That teaches the multiple selves, or the plurality of the selves that is there. Now, this can also refer to a lot of prevailing Siddhantas during the medieval times that comes in all the other traditions. I'm doing this presenting in an academic sense, so please pardon me, no disrespect to any of these traditions, but these could refer to all the different theistic traditions. All right, theistic traditions are also included here. Basically, all the traditions that teach that the selves are many, Atma are many. The Atma is basically in many form, in manifold in that sense. So they all first addressed in this particular shloka. In the next verse, it is it reveals the next set of darshanas. So here it is presenting what we call as a Nastika darshanas. So the Nastika darshanas here, if you were to realize, now if you look at the shloka, it is not mentioning the word Nastika in the sense. It is just saying the what I call the definition of the belief. That's what it's presenting, and this obviously refers to the all in the earlier days. These belong to the very famous Charvakas and also Lokayata, two important darshanas that take the view that all you see is what you see, what meets the eye, and that's all there is. There is no reason for you to believe in dharma. There is no belief to believe in God or karma. All of that is unnecessary. But you need to also see that the key word here is pratyaksha vishayam. The people who only recognize that there is only pratyaksha vishayam. Pratyaksha vishayam means perceptible objects. All right, that is only there. They don't believe in in swarga, or what's in heaven, all right, or even hell. All right, so it says, and of course here the swargadaya, meaning that onwards, that means there could be even multiple heavens up there. So it says that. So that tells us something very interesting. Now listen to this, because pratyaksha vishaya, just because you recognize, you see, and you only accept pratyaksha vishaya, does not mean that you're just a charvaka or a lokayata. In the modern world, these people who only accept pratyaksha vishaya are also scientists. Now, people who only say that science is the truth, or for everything we need a perceptible evidence. All right, that means the evidence that I look for validity is that I must be able to experience it through the indriyas, the five sensory organs. So if anything can be experienced in the five sensory organs, therefore it exists. And all such people are called scientists. So if many of us may know that, in the Shastra, all the dharmika traditions, right? The pramanas are primarily can be condensed into three, right? Pratyaksha, Anumana, Shabda. So you can see that those who subscribe to only pratyaksha are primarily people who are also scientists. Because why? Because Anumana also depends on pratyaksha, meaning inference. Because scientists make a lot of inference, right? Because they study, they do an experiment, they look at the experiment, they look at the data, they look at the findings, and then they make inferences. Oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? 1 + 1, you get this compound. Okay, so what does that mean? What's the implication? They make inferences. So pratyaksha here can also include inference. So therefore, scientists, people who believe that only evidence is through perception and inference, these two, when they come together, they are also included here as one of those darshanas that are considered to be erroneous by the Shiva Samhita. So what I'm trying to say is that in today, the scientists are also included here. If science alone is to be seen as the validity of truth or realities. Now, next verse. In the next verse, now you can see that here there are a couple of schools that come up. All right, as you can see, jnana pravaha, that is one particular word that is used, and shunyam. So this obviously, these two words obviously refers to the Buddhist doctrines, right? Bauddha matam. So Buddhism is actually presented here, because some of you may know that this may also, the Shunyavada. Shunyavada means the belief that there is nothing, emptiness rather. Everything is empty, empty of anything substantial, empty of anything permanent. Not that it's emptiness, emptiness of something actually. So what the Buddhists are teaching when they say Shunya is that it is empty of something. So empty of permanence, empty of something that is absolute, that is denied. The other one is Vijnanavada, which is basically, it's a cognitive assessment saying that cognitions come and go, come and go, come and go, etc. Every time that you have a new thoughts, and it happens in succession. All right, that means one thought depends on another. So it is not entirely these definitions are not entirely denied in Advaita Vedanta. However, they are denied as the absolute conclusion, meaning that this is not the conclusion of Advaita Vedanta, but this is one of the means that are employed. Some of these ideas can be acceptable, but they are not absolute in that sense. They're not absolute conclusions. So the Shiva Samhita is denying the validity of the Buddhist Buddhism's conclusions with regard to these two traditions or these two philosophies, which are interconnected. Now, second line, you can see that it denies Sankhya, specifically Sankhya, because it says that people who teach that there are two, you can say Dvaveva, two realities, which is Prakriti and Purusha, right? So Prakriti and Purusha is now denied. So this includes yoga as well. So Patanjali Yoga is also, and Sankhya are included here. So the Shiva Samhita is categorically considering the Sankhya and the Patanjali Yoga Darshana to be an erroneous doctrine. All right, so that's the position that he's taking. Now, at this point, some of us may be very concerned that I mentioned Patanjali Yoga as in here and is denied as valid, and is denied as invalid, right? As an invalid doctrine. Some of you may be very concerned by that. Now, we need to also understand here that in Advaita Vedanta, especially the teachings of Shankara in his Prasthanatraya Bhasham, the commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishad, and Brahma Sutra, as well as even Upadesha Sastri, we see something very clear. Now, Shankara does not deny meditation. Now, this is a very important point. Shankara does not deny meditation at all, but what he denies is that the darshana, that means a philosophy involving meditation as the means to a final truth. That is what he's denying. And this can be seen because in the Gita, there is samadhi, that the term samadhi appears, and then he presents it as concentration, or sometimes the ability to focus or be vigilant, to be vigilant or being alert. Now all of that comes, and also chapter 6 as well, and we cannot deny that. So sometimes meditation can also be two types, right, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, which is the Vastu Tantra meditation. The other one is called the Purusha Tantra meditation. So these two types of meditation are presented in the Shastra. So whenever darshana is denied, so whenever Patanjali Yoga Darshana is denied, because Patanjali Yoga Darshana is presenting a Purusha Tantra type of meditation, which is a very unique type of meditation that depends on the person. While the meditation that Shankara allows is also two types he allows. One is called the Vastu Tantra, which is called Nididhyasana. Some of you may know, very familiar, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is a Vastu Tantra type of meditation that is allowed. All right. And the other one is, of course, meditation that is performed like upasanas, that is there in the Upanishad itself and also in the Aranyaka of the Veda, portion of the Veda. Now, all of that contribute to the steadiness of the mind. Sometimes it is called Shatka Sampatti. Many of the attributes of the Shatka Sampatti in the Sadhana Chatushtaya actually lead to this, what I call, can lead to this as, can be the results of meditation. All right, that is something very key that we need to see. All right, that's why we cannot deny the validity of meditation. But what is denied here is that meditation as a philosophy, as a means and leading, as a direct means leading to an end called moksha. That is what is denied. So that's why Patanjali Yoga as a darshana, as a philosophy, is denied in this particular verse. So we need to recognize that. Now, in the next verse, as you can see in the Shiva Samhita, in the next two verses, you can see a couple of terms that is used. All right. So So he says against other thinkers who have deviated from the Paramartha. All right, he says from the Paramartha Drishti, basically, it says. And then it says that the next, these further categories are presented. Next, first one is called Nirishwaram. That means the whole idea of Nirishwaram means atheist, people who don't believe in God. All right, that is one. That means that there's no Ishvara that is there. All right, now there is also Ishvaravada. Ishvaravada is also denied here. That means there is also something called Ishvara, also denied. And then there is also people who argue or logically, try to evaluate truth. That means they use logic and reasoning. So these are people who like to debate, who argue and think that argument and debating or logical analysis alone is enough. Reasoning, tarkam is enough to actually conclude the truths of life or what's presented here in Advaita Vedanta. So these three schools are denied. So Ishvaravada is the term that that comes up as Ishvara, people who say that the universe is governed by God, and that idea. Now, this is actually, this can possibly refer to the school of Nyaya. Some of you may know that the Nyaya school, the Nyaya Darshana spent quite a lot of energy trying to prove the existence of God. I think there are some nice texts in the Nyaya tradition that does a great job at trying to establish God through the Nyaya methods, like the text called Nyaya Kusumanjali, or even Atma Tattva Viveka by Acharya called Udayanacharya. So you can see all of these texts making in the Nyaya tradition that takes a lot of argumentative and reasoning approach to establish God. So that is Ishvaravada. Then Nirishvaravada could also refer to the atheist, meaning that this is not just about Charvaka and Lokayatas are also included here. But this specifically points out rather people who deny that there is God, that there is no such thing as God, Purusha, Ishvara. Now, all of that is also here. And this can include even Buddhism as well, because Buddhism also denies Ishvara. So Charvaka, Lokayata, Buddhism, all of them are here and they are denied. And then, of course, lastly, people who just use logic, all right, people who employ just logic. So these are also indicative of the kind of what I call environment that what I call social climate that the author could have been in when he compiled these verses or wrote these verses, all right, to present this. Very beautiful though. And interestingly, almost all of these definitions or even darshanas have been refuted by Shankara. That's the interesting point, right? So like the Charvaka, Lokayata, Buddhist schools, specific schools, then we see Sankhya, Yoga, all of them have been refuted by Shankara. So Shankara in his commentaries, in his bhashyas, has refuted all of these things that are mentioned here. So again, this is an evidence that the author of this particular text is very familiar, but again, presenting from that same understanding of Shankara's refutations, but he presents them in a different way. Instead of naming the schools, right? Just Shankara also does that sometimes. He doesn't name the school, but he presents a doctrine as a Purva Paksha, meaning an contemporary opposing view, and then he presents a Siddhanta by doing a Mimamsa, an analysis. He does that. So the same thing happens here as well. So, and then he goes on, the Shastra goes on, he says that, you can see here very interestingly, he says that, all these people has presented all of this, ideas, that is there, very, very different ideas. And the interesting part is, these are all Shastram, right? These are all Shastra. That means all of these ideas can be presented in Shastra. Even the Charvakas and the Lokayatas also have their own Shastra. Am I right? They have, I think there's a text called Tattva Upaplava Simha, which is another text that actually entirely demolishes from a very scientific perspective, like the Charvakas and the Lokayata. It's also written, Shastra, written in Sanskrit as well, in Sanskritam. Can you believe it? that's written to demolish all the dharma, all the shastra, that is what I call all the traditions that subscribe to Ishvara and dharma, etc. Now that is also done. So therefore, these are all shastras, meaning the Shiva Samhita is acknowledging that these are well-established traditions with shastras, and they still cause problems. That's what it's saying. And then very, very strongly it says, Loka Vyamoha Karakaha, the one who delude, right? They are all people, deluders. They delude people through through their shastra, through their doctrines, through their texts. They delude people. It says very, very strongly. And then he uses the word that I shared earlier in the next verse, that these people are basically a very nice word. It says they are basically people who are very good at arguing. Very nice word. They are what? Vivada Shilana. It says these people, they are very opinionated, right? Very opinionated, and they are always arguing. They love arguing. All right. And now these people have deviated from the path of liberation. So very nice line. Mukti marga bahishkritaha. It says these are people who have completely deviated from mukti. So what does this tell us? So people who tend to be argumentative. So he says all these people, why do they argue? Now who needs to argue? Now people who know something, who have understood something very well, they usually will not engage in arguments, right? Unnecessary arguments. But they will engage in samvada. Samvada means, which is basically an inquiry into the truth, sat. So other than that, people who want to prove a point will usually argue. And they are the ones who are constantly finding faults and fault finding and trying to find fault in the other person's, you have heard, right? What you call Vedanta, etc., right? All the different types of debates that appears in the Nyaya philosophy as well. So all these are very, very unnecessary. All right. That means, why is it unnecessary? Because you need to not defend. So it is very, very interesting that it says that people who take delight in arguments and argumentation are people who are now defending an ism, right? They are defending a matam. Matam here means also a particular doctrine they're trying to defend, and they do it very well. All right. And that's what this Shiva Samhita says. So those people who do that, all of the previous philosophies, they try to argue and debate and justify. Yes, all of them have not understood the Mukti Marga. It says very, very clearly. So definitely the person who wrote this was very, very clear and had a very clear conviction of how this is effective. Now with that, let's look at the next part of the Shiva Samhita, which is what are the qualifications of this right doctrine. That means there is something called Mukti Marga, right? It implies that there is something called Mukti Marga. There is a path, there is a lifestyle, there is a way to actually attain this Mukti. And also the seeker, which is the Adhikari, or what we call sometimes the Mumukshu, the person who is seeking this moksha. All right, what are the person's qualifications? Let's look at that. So here, in the next verse in this Shiva Samhita, it talks about what is this doctrine. So here it says that this particular right doctrine, that means the Mukti Marga, is presented as Yoga Shastram, Parammatam, the greatest, the best doctrine. All right, Yoga Shastram. So it's a very interesting word. It's a very generic word actually, right? Because yoga could mean a lot of things. But the Yoga Shastram here can refer to a couple of things. Now, it can also mean Yoga Shastram in the Bhagavad Gita. Whenever if you look at the verse in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, Lokis mean Dvida Nishta, right? That is yoga there, right? Karma Yogena Yoginam. So Yoga Shastra can also mean the doctrine of karma. That is one, which is karma yoga here. And the other definition of Yoga Shastra could also mean mukti itself. That means the whole knowledge about mukti. That's why that's why Gita gives a couple of definitions for yoga. The first type of definition that is about using karma as a means to attain purification and then becoming eligible for jnanam. It's basically two definitions: yoga karmasu kaushalam, samatvam yoga uchyate, that appears in chapter 2. Right, so one is action component, the other one is the acceptance component. So I perform action and then the results come back and I accept it with a particular attitude. That's samatvam. Then the second one, right, the part about yoga being the very moksha, So that is also in the Gita. Dukkha samyoga viyoga iti yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, you see that as well. All right, dukkha samyoga viyoga iti yoga. So again, interesting, right? So this obviously here, in this context, it certainly looks like when it says yoga shastram, it refers to dukkha samyoga viyoga, which is basically the severance of the conjunction or attachment to dukkha, sorrow, life's afflictions, which is samsara dukkha, which is the life of basically the whole life of birth and death and being dissatisfied and always trying to be someone else other than who I am, right? That is, in fact, to me, I think that's the most psychological definition of samsara. Samsara is basically trying to be someone other than who you are. Then what does that mean? It means that I'm constantly trying to change myself through karmas. Why do I employ karma? Because I want to change situations. I want to change myself. I want to change my experiences. So whenever I want to change something, I have to do karma. And the reason why I do that is because I cannot accept myself, right? The moment I cannot accept myself, then what do? I look for new experiences, either in the world of religious action or in the world of secular action. So both of them, Laukika karmas, Shastrokta karmas, both of them are employed so that I can then create a new experience for myself. So what does that mean? I want change. Why? Because I can't accept myself. Why? Because I see myself as someone inadequate. All right. So I am alpaha, all right, or alpaknya. I don't know a lot of things and I'm limited. Therefore, I'm looking for satisfaction or fulfillment through karmas. So coming back to the Shastra, it says that this whole Yoga Shastram is actually the one that leads to Mukti. And then it goes further. It says, look at this particular verse. Those of you who are familiar with the Upanishad would see something very similar here. Yasmin jnate sarvamidam jnatam bhavati nishchitam, it says. So this is very, very interesting because this is very, very similar to two mantras or other mantras that appear in the Mundaka Upanishad and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So it is basically knowing that by which everything else is known. So you know that this in the Mundaka, it's, the Vijñate, Sarvamidam Vijñatam Bhavatiti, that particular mantra. And then in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we also have a mantra that says Yenedam Sarvam Vijaniti, etc. So this shows that the author of the Shiva Samhita has actually paraphrased. All right, he has paraphrased the two mantras in his own words by presenting this. So the whole discipline of Yoga Shastram then that means the Yoga Shastram that was talked about earlier. What is this whole discipline? Basically, it is to know, this Yoga Shastram is basically to know that which is as good as knowing everything else in the world. All right, so that is what it is mentioned here, but it's very beautifully paraphrased. And then it goes further. Next, here it mentions now who is worthy of attaining this knowledge. Now, look at this very interesting approach. Now, usually earlier it mentioned that the bhaktas are the ones who are eligible. In verse 2, it mentions, right? It says, uses the word, very nice line, ananya gati chetasam, those who have that kind of commitment, who are totally surrendered as well. It mentioned. Now it adds another important qualification. It says it should be only what I call taught to a subhakta. Very important. Subhakta, a good bhakta, a good devotee, and a mahatma. All right, that means a person who is a great person. So what does that mean? So this means that number one, a bhakta could mean many things. Now, the one way to look at this is this particular person has to be someone who acknowledges the existence of Ishvara. All right, that's one. That is Ishvara. There is something more than what either eyes can see. And when you acknowledge that Ishvara, automatically you become a bhakta. People always ask, when is the bhakta born? Now, very simple. When is the son and the father relationship, right? Now, the son is born the moment there is a father, right? It happens in the same time. When the child is born, the fatherhood is born. So the roles take place instantaneously at the same time. The moment I acknowledge that, I become a bhakta. That's one. Now, the word the Mahatma here means that the person has engaged in what I call as satkarma. That means in doing their duties very well, doing all the karmas very well, trying to stay away from the wrong karmas, which we'll see shortly, all of that. So it says very clearly that the person who is eligible for this knowledge, competent and adhikari, is actually a subhakta and a mahatma. This idea is also found in the Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 18, verse 67, you'll find the same idea, where Krishna says that don't teach this to a person who is not a devotee or not a bhakta. You see, the same idea is now paraphrased in this particular section. So with that, now the next section, right, of the Shiva Samhita is how are the Veda and karmas organized. So Shiva Samhita also tackles, now you see that it already shared that only teach this to this kind of people, and this yoga shastra is nothing but knowing that by which everything else is known, which is already know that this is something from the Upanishads. We already saw that. Now, how are these organized? The Shiva Samhita beautifully presents this. It says that there is two categories or sections in the Veda. So now listen to this very carefully. It automatically assumes that this knowledge comes from the Veda. It does not use the word, interestingly, let's be very, very, I mean, it's a very interesting observation. It didn't use the word Shruti, right? Interesting. In the earlier verses, we saw the word Shruti. But here the word Veda directly comes and it presents the Veda. Very interesting. Why? Because for other traditions, sometimes the Shruti can also include the Tantra and Agama, right? Because those people who have the Agama tradition, those who are in the Tantric tradition, sometimes consider the Agama and the Tantra to be also of the same authority as the Veda. So for them, the Shruti means it is Veda, Tantra, Agama. All of them are Shruti. And then there is also some traditions in the Tantra tradition that denies the superiority of the Veda. Like, for example, Abhinava Gupta. I believe some of you may be familiar with Abhinava Gupta. Now, Abhinava Gupta from the Kashmir Shaiva tradition denies the validity of the Upanishads compared to the Tantra. He says the Tantra and the Agamas are more superior to even the Upanishads. That's his argument. Not that he doesn't use those teachings of the Upanishad. He says that the Tantras and Agamas are more superior in that sense. So this verse uses the word Veda. So this is very interesting. So it is using the Veda alone as the authority in that sense. And then it says this Veda can be divided into two sections. Karma Kanda and Nyanakanda. So Karma Kanda is the section of the Veda that promotes the performance of ritual. And who is this for? This Karma Kanda is for those people in Navrati Dharma, the 99.99% of the society who are engaged in action. For them, the Karma Kanda. And then Nyanakanda, the section of knowledge of the Veda, which is primarily the Upanishads, as you would know, is primarily for the people in Navrati Dharma who want a direct means to moksha. So it presents that. And this categorization of Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda, many of us know this, but interestingly, you will not find this explicitly stated in many shastras. It's alluded to sometimes, but it is the word Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda does not explicitly appear. But in one Advaita Vedanta text, it appears very explicitly, which is the Vedanta Sara. So that's why I mentioned that the author of Shiva Samhita is actually heavily influenced by Vedanta Sara, it looks like. So in the Vedanta Sara, a similar categorization appears, all right, Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. And also something close to this also appears in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Vartika. Okay, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Vartika by Sureshwara, also it appears. All right, there is actually a presentation of this classic twofold division of Veda, and this kind of two Khanda is mentioned there as well, but more explicitly in the Vedanta Sara. And then it goes further. What are these? Can we further actually define them? So first it defines Karma Kanda. All right, so it says in Karma Kanda, there are a couple of karmas. You can see there is Nishiddha Karma, there's Nitya Karma, etc. All of you may know Naimittika Karma, all of that it is mentioned. But at least what we know is that there is two important Vidhi, right, that is there. One is Vidhi Karma, means things to be done. And then there's Nishiddha Karma, things that we should not do. So when in Karma Kanda, there are basically two broad categorizations. What is that? Basically, things that you should do and things that you should not do. And this is further classified as, Nitya Karma, Naimittika Karma, etc. All of that, which is we will see which is also explained very, very, very elaborately in the Vedanta Sara as well. All right, so it says two things: things that you should do, things that you should not do. So it says very interestingly, if you do the things if you do things that are not to be done, you incur papa, demerit. And if you do things that you should be doing, you get punya. It says that's all very straightforward. It presents, but it's interesting, right? Because a lot of times these are assumed in a lot of prakarana grantha, right? It's assumed. They don't go into an elaborate exposition of how it works, how Navrati Dharma works. But here, the Shiva Samhita takes effort. It takes effort to present it very, very clearly. And then it goes further that you can actually divide the karma, the vidhi part. That means the part that you should do. So remember, the previous categorization was things you should not do and karmas that you should do. So the karmas that you should do can be divided into threefold. It says, so many of us may know this, nitya, naimittika, kamya. So nitya karma, things that you should do daily, not they are obligatory actions. And then naimittika, things that you do occasionally based on situations. All right. And lastly, kamya, specific goals that I have. Now, all of them are presented here. So it says that when someone does not do this karmas, especially you can see that when nitya karma is not done, it results in sin. Now, this is very interesting because some of us may know that Shankara makes a very interesting observation. He does not take the view that actually the non-performance of action leads to papa. He says that it does not. It's a very fine point. Not that it is not that what is being said here is incorrect, but rather this is refined by Shankara. Shankara makes a very interesting point that the non-performance of action does not produce papa because there is no action. All right, but it results in the prevention of it doesn't prevent the rise of papa. That's what he says. And this idea is also found in the Gita. All right, the whole idea of sin, the word kilbisham. The kilbisham is as a sin of papa, appears in the Bhagavad Gita as well. So now that we've spoken about that, now let's talk about why karmas are ineffective in gaining mukti. So here, the Shiva Samhita tells us, why is it ineffective? Why do karmas not allow us to gain mukti? So it says that that the fruit of karmas, so it goes further, whenever you perform karma, the result of the karma leads you to heaven or hell, right? It says swarga or naraka, it says. And he says the heaven happens to be manifold. It is nana vida, it says. And so is hell. So that's why some of us may know 7 up, 7 down, right? And of course, in the 7 up, it's already one that we are in already. So 7 up and 7 down in the Puranas that come about. So it says there are many types, and all it does is it brings you into heaven and hell. Karma leads you to swarga or naraka. That's what it does. And then let's look at this. He said that heaven is gained, swarga is gained by good actions, which is punya karma, right? And then he says hell is attained, naraka is attained by papa karma, which is demerit. Then therefore he says the whole creation is therefore full of binding actions and nothing else. Very, very bold statement. So it says that that the whole creation that we have, the srishti, all right, it is full of this karma that is binding. Now, this idea is already in the Bhagavad Gita. If you look at chapter 3, the whole idea of the whole sequence of actions that contributes to the world phenomenon and how, eventually the whole parampara, so to say, cycle, chakra that happens, it's presented in chapter 3. And also, this whole idea is also found in Vedanta Sara. You also find this. And just like that, Bhagavad Gita also says that all the worlds are filled with sorrow. The Bhagavad Gita takes the same position in chapter 8 that you can find. So the purpose then is, first, obviously, is not presenting something new. It's presenting something that we already know. However, the purpose of this is to develop vairagya. Now, you can see that, right? Now, why is it saying this? Because you know that karmas is binding, because the whole universe is bound by this karma. Without this karma, the whole universe cannot sustain, including the swarga and naraka, heaven and hell, all of them. And then it goes further. It says that the pleasures are many, all right, by the creatures in heaven. So if you go to heaven, there are many, many pleasures that are waiting for you. Nana sukhani, it says, many, many different types of sukham, all right, enjoyments. And then similarly, there's a lot of dukkha in naraka, there is dukkha, all right, and also nana vidhani, it says, very different, many different types of dukkha it takes place in the naraka as well. So basically, heaven, if you go, enjoyment. If you go naraka, it is basically sorrow. Then it says further that owing to the demeritorious actions, there is pain and suffering, etc. We already know. Therefore, the seeker of pleasure goes on performing meritorious actions. So look at this. So because there is pain in the papa karma, and then there is enjoyment, right, in the punya karma. Therefore, the person who wants enjoyments naturally does punya karma. So it says the nice word is called sukharti, the one who wants sukham, the one who wants enjoyment. He naturally does punya karma. All right, so this is very clearly stated. And then it goes further. Now, this is when there is the whole idea of samsara is now presented. Now, it says after the experience of papa, all right, there is rebirth. All right, after the experience of punya, also rebirth. So what does it say? This whole experience of enjoyment and what I call and sorrow in the two worlds called heaven and hell, you are born again. That's why the word punarjanma, you're repeatedly born again, and it goes on. So your birth takes place again. It doesn't cease. It doesn't end. It keeps going on. And then it goes further. Now, this is the very unique point that you find. Very, very interesting verse in the Shiva Samhita. It says, even in heaven, there is the experience of pain. Now, look at that. Earlier, it said in heaven, you look for, there is enjoyment. But look at the argument here. He says, even in heaven, you could experience dukkha because of someone else's greatness. So what does that mean? Let's say I'm in heaven, and then I realize that there is someone else who has a front row seat in front of God, and then you get a back row seat. So what does that mean? There is a taratamyata, there is a difference, gradation. So one person is closer to God, and you are behind. So even in heaven, in a place where everything is enjoyable, there could be actually what you call unhappiness. So how do you look at it? It's like, when you take an aircraft, business class seat and then economy seats, right? Both of you are in the same plane, but there is different class treatment. Can you see that? But the plane is fine, right? There's an air condition, all the meals are served, but there's a gradation. So the flight example is a good example for this. So even if you are in heaven, there is a difference. The experience is different. And because there is a difference, therefore, you can be even unhappy even in heaven. Can you see that? Because another person has maybe a greater advantage than you. So therefore, he concludes, there is no doubt that tato dukkhamidam sarvam, he says. Beautiful. Therefore, dukkhamidam sarvam, the whole world is full of dukkham. He says sorrow. Because why? Even the very experience of enjoyment can lead to dukkha. That's the argument. So that is what it says. So therefore, it says, here you can see that they say that basically summarizing that this whole twofold, right? The whole preceptors have said that the action is twofold. Karma is twofold, papa and punya. And those people who are embodied, they are bound by that. That's what he says. And then with that, now he reveals the next thing. So what is the means to mukti? So now the earlier verses were presented and to develop vairagya and to see the fact that that karma cannot help us. So now that we know categorically that karma cannot help us, then what is the means to mukti? So now the Shiva Samhita is going now to present. The first thing it does is to tell that the most important thing to be done is the person has to renounce. You can see nitya naimittika karma, as well as which we'll see later, that you need to renounce that and also not desire the phala of the action. Two of them are there. So what does this indicate? It indicates sannyasa. So that's why the first chapter is very clear that the adhikari is a sannyasi. So that means someone who wants to attain this direct means to mukti should take up sannyasa. It makes it very clear. And then it goes now further. It says an intelligent person should look at karma kanda and analyze it. Analyze the karma kanda after knowing that, it is not helpful. And then go towards Nyanakanda, where you can overcome papa and punya. So now it presents the position. So let go of karma kanda and then now move to Nyanakanda after renouncing karma, which is basically karma sannyasa, all right, which is basically a sannyasi, a monk, a renunciate or whatever. All right, so this is a requirement. And interestingly, this is a requirement of Shankara also. Shankara makes this in this Upanishad Bhashyam, etc., that the sannyasa is required, a renunciation is required rather. All right, it has to be there. And this, in the technical term of Advaita Vedanta, this seems to suggest that it is a Vividisha sannyasa. Now, Vividisha sannyasa is a type of sannyasa that I'm taking up this sannyasa so that I can seek knowledge. All right, a sannyasa that I take up to seek knowledge. So that is what it's alluded to in this particular verse. Now, in verse 32 is the very, very beautiful verse, because this is where you can see the author's knowledge of the Upanishads. Because here, look at this verse, it says that the one that liberates, listen to this very carefully, the one that liberates is the mantra from the Shruti. And he quotes the very famous mantra in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which teaches Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. So Atma Vare tu Drishtavyaha, Shrotavyaha, Mantavyaha, Nididhyasitavyaha. This particular mantra is now quoted in part in this particular shloka. So this tells us that the Shiva Samhita, first chapter, is totally aligned with the Upanishads. And it quotes that the means to actually liberate oneself is actually through Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. This is very clearly stated. And this idea, now this is something very interesting. Now, some of you may not be familiar with this, and some of you may be familiar as well, that Shankara does not say that it is only Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana that is the method. Okay, that means he doesn't say that this is the main method. He doesn't say that at all. If we look at even Sureshwara, now Sureshwara, who is a disciple of Shankara, in his Naishkrimi Siddhi, he presents the sequence. Even in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Vartika, also Sureshwara presents a sequence. Now, in the sequence, when the part comes about the whole process of attaining mukti, in the sequence of things to be observed, in the part where the jnanam is gained, Sureshwara also does not mention that it is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. So, because there's a problem to this. Because if someone claims that Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana alone is the method of Jnana Yoga or Nyanakanda or attaining mukti, then you have a problem. That means that this method is only revealed in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. How about the other Upanishads? Right? So the whole point is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana as a method is one of the methods, but it's definitely a great method. So what does this tell us is that this Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana as a composite method, as a very famous way. I mean, in my opinion, I think Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana is a very great method to actually convey the idea, all right, convey the idea that the self is Brahman. But it is not that it is the sole method that is used as taught by Shankara and Sureshwara. However, this whole Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana as a composite process, a triple method, appears in Vedanta Sara, in Anubhuti Prakasha, in Viveka Chudamani, Panchadashi. All of these texts, interestingly, belong to the Vivarana tradition of Advaita Vedanta. So can you see that? All of these texts are from the Vivarana tradition. So they are so you can see that the compiler or the author is very familiar with the Vivarana text to say this, to quote this mantra. And he says, Yachutihi. He says, Yachutihi. What does it say? It's from the Shruti, he says. So he's very familiar with that. And then he goes further. Here you can see that when this liberating knowledge takes place, now this is the realization. Now you can see this verse is from the first person's voice. It all starts with I, right? I, from the I in that sense. So this is also very similar to the shloka that we have in the Gita, chapter 9, Maya tate midam sarvam jagad avyakta murtina, the particular shloka that we know, it is very similar. So the liberating knowledge leads to this realization. When the Shravana Manana Nidhyasana is employed, now this is the understanding, the self perspective, the drishti, the vision of the mukta. And it goes further. So it goes on. So owing to the perishability, birth and death, the beings such as gods, etc., have been ascertained by through the study of scriptures, or some by self-realization. So what he concludes is that when the knowledge is known, all of these things, the birds, the birth and death, the world, the gods, all of them are considered to be anitya. Okay, the anitya. Agama payino nityaha. This verse also appears in the Bhagavad Gita as well, right? So it says that all of them are non-eternal, they are anityam. And how do you arrive at it? Now, again, very interesting. Some of them arrive through Shastra. Some of them arise through the knowledge of the self. They actually arrive there. So both of them, so he says that this anityatvam of the world, or mithyatvam of the world, can be arrived through Shastra and also through your own realization, right? From your own knowledge of the self, or all I call it even, or your own vichara can lead you to that. And then it goes on now, talking about one more verse. Now here it says, this is with the verse that caught my eye for the first time when I encountered this text. Here you can see that the Shiva Samhita mentions the method, which is adhyaropa apavadabhyam layam kurvanti yoginaha. So the whole method of the Upanishad, according to Shankara mentions this method in the Bhagavad Gita Bhashyam commentary on chapter 13, verse 13. If I'm not wrong, you can find it there, where he mentions that this is the method. So here again, you can see that the author is very familiar with the methodology of the Upanishads. And then here later, he says one more interesting point, that that this adhyaropa apavada again appears. Can you see this repetition? All right, that appears in the Shiva Samhita a little later, verse 93, towards the end. It says that that this you should ascertain this knowledge through the method of adhyaropa apavada, and that's when it gets resolved. Everything gets resolved. Beautiful, right? It says that. And from that now, question now. Now that I know that this is the knowledge and the method is adhyaropa apavada, etc., now how do I realize it? So here comes the nyayas. So nyayas are basically, they are illustrations that are very good examples. Snake and rope is one example. So like that, many examples are given. So here, the first nyaya that is provided is the same sun appearing in different pots of water. So let's say you have different pots of water. Now, the one sun that is right on top appears as many suns. So the one reality appearing as many is a concept that is found. Again, you see, same thing is mentioned here. Now, this example appears in the Brahma Sutra Bhashyam of Shankara. It appears. So here again, he's very familiar of this particular example that appears in Brahma Sutra Bhashyam. And then the next example of the illustration of Nyaya that is given is here. The dream experience, the dream and the experience. How there is this manifoldness. So this is a little related to the example in the Mandukya Karika that you find, the dream being the same or the same reality, etc. And also in Shankara Bhashyam in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the dream illustrations and the waking and dream states, comparison that is happening. Now here's another one, the snake and rope, and of course the conch and the shell, the silver shell example, that is given. Again, this snake rope appears in the Upanishad Bhashyams of Shankara, and so does the silver shell example. All right, many of you may be familiar with these examples. Also appears in Shankara's Bhashya. But one interesting thing that you want to see is the important point, the second line, right? Tadvad evamidam vishvam vivrtam paramatmani. So vivrtam. So this vivrtam is like the word for vivartavada. Now again, vivartavada is a term that comes later. It doesn't appear in Shankara's works, but it appears here, vivrtam. So vivrtam here means an appearance. It's an appearance that happens as the universe is an appearance, but Brahman is not affected. The Paramatma is not affected. That is the whole idea. So that is presented here, as you can see. The idea of vivartavada or vivarta or vivrtam is mentioned in this particular shloka. And this Vivartam also, you can find this in Panchadashi as well. Panchadashi talks about this Vivartavada as well in there. And then further, you can see that here it says, look at this, the same example is mentioned about the silver and seashell. And it says that the knowledge of the self, that means knowledge of the self is the means. Atma jnanat sada tata, it says. So that means it's through the Atma jnana, through the knowledge of this Atma alone, this Jagat Bhranti means this universe that you see as a result of an error, of a misunderstanding, all right, takes place. It says very beautifully, consistent with Advaita Vedanta. And then again, it goes further. This time it talks about the rope snake illusion. And the key thing that I want to talk about here is that the word adhyasa appears in the second line. Can you see? Tata jagadidam brantir adhyasa kalpana jagate, it says. All right. So adhyasa, superimposition, which is a very, very important idea that was developed by Shankara in the introduction to the Brahma Sutra Bhashyam. So again, adhyasa happens. The world is but a superimposition. Now, beautiful, right? Again, the author is very familiar with adhyasa, superimposition. And then goes further. Again, another nyaya. This is the jaundice, jaundiced eyes. Like if I have jaundice, I see everything in yellow. Now, this example interestingly appears in the Vedanta Paribhasha, which is a much later text of the Vivarana tradition. Again, Vivarana tradition comes up and he talks about the jaundiced eyes. And then very beautifully, this is mentioned. And this is actually, and the other thing is also, all the examples also tell us is subjective. The error is subjective. That means it is not an objective error per se, right? So therefore, it seems to talk about, seems to suggest, not that it's conclusive, like there is this, what we call as the subjective error, which is drishti srishtivada. Something of that sort seems to be alluded to, but it's not conclusive, or it may not be so. Then further, you can see another example, foam and water in the ocean. So, like wave and water, foam and water. Now, foam and water example appears again in Shankara's works. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it appears, and also in Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri. In Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri also, it appears, foam and water example, the Nyaya. And then the next one is the Ghatakasha Nyaya, which is the space in the pot and outside the pot example that appears. Now, this again is, you can find this in the Mandukya Karika as well as the Brahma Sutra Bhashyam of Shankara. Also, you find this example. Again, repeatedly you see, right, the ideas that come about. And again here, the space example, Akasha example also comes, which is also, that is there, all right? You can see that appears as well here. Akasha example, the ether pervading everything, you can see. And the beautiful thing is the word asam lagnam, which I spoke about yesterday to the question that that Manuji asked. So instead of asparsha, which is a term that is used in the Mandukya Karika, the Shiva Samhita uses the term asam lagnam, which is same meaning actually, not being touched by anything that is being used. And this same idea is also found in the Sutra Bhashyam as well. Brahma Sutra Bhashyam is also there. So it is presented here. And then with that, again, the 3 periods of time, Trikala Abhaditam iti Satyam. That means the definition of something that is eternal is that which is existent in all 3 periods. Again mentioned there, Kala Trayepi, etc. It mentions. So again, next. In 145, if you look at the key emphasis at this point, is that again, Shastra etad vinishchitam. That means the same point that I mentioned earlier is repeated here again. And then now next, what is this knowledge? So I just want to quickly go through. What is this knowledge that we are talking about? So here you can see that the knowledge of this that is gained is here. The entire universe along with Lord is pervaded from the sides by that one, devoid of duality, etc. And the term that is used is Satchidananda. Again, Satchidananda is a term that does not appear in Shankara's commentaries. Shankara does not use this term in his commentaries, but the word Satchidananda appears in both the works of the Bhamati and the Vivarana tradition of Advaita Vedanta. So it's used. And then he used a very unique term, Dvaita Vivarjitaha. Instead of using Advaita, he uses another word, which is very similar to the meaning is the same, which is Dvaita Vivarjitaha, without any duality. It does not have any duality that is mentioned. And then another term that appears in the next verse, which is called Swaprakasha. The Atma is Swaprakasha, self-illuminating. Now, the term Swaprakasha appears, is a quite uncommon term. Although the mantra in the Mundaka Upanishad and Katha Upanishad, Natatra Suryo, Bhatina Chandra Tarakam, very famous mantra, is also alluding to this. But the term Swaprakasha appears to have been popularized by an acharya called Chitsuka. Some of you may know Chitsuka. Now, in his work, you see this term called Swaprakasha, and that is mentioned here. And then moving on, about the knowledge, again, you see what is this knowledge? The Atman is not limited by space and time. All right, so that is also, you can see here. And this is also found in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Shankara mentions this as well in his commentary, that the Atman is not bound by space and time. And then the next one, which is basically the Atman is indestructible. It cannot be destroyed when the Panchabhuta, the 5 elements, are destroyed. Again, that is the central teaching of all the Upanishads, right? The Atman being eternal, Dhruvam, etc. It's all there. And then here, another verse, which says, apart from this Atma, everything else is Mithya. Now, this is very similar to the very famous line that we see in Viveka Chudamani, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, or another verse that some of us may be very familiar, that appears in the Vedanta Dindima, which is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. That particular statement, that very famous statement, it sounds like what I call adaptation of that particular verse. Now, with that, let's look at what causes samsara and the means to destroy it, according to Shiva Samhita. So the Shiva Samhita is very clear that the whole samsara is avidya bhuta. So you can see in the first line, avidya bhuta samsare dukkha nashe sukham yataha. That means the whole samsara is there because of avidya, which is a key point of Advaita Vedanta. It is avidya that is a problem, and he makes that very clear. And he also adds some other components. Here you can see the samsara is caused by ignorance, and you can see the verses. And then this ignorance is defined through its effect, etc., in many ways. For example, time, kalaha, or maya also appears as a reason for this samsara, the manifoldness, the diversity, or karma. Karma is also presented. And then sometimes it is expanded through the permutations. This is the evolution of the universe, the manifestation of the universe, which is called panchikarana, which is the evolution or the permutation of the 5 panchabhuta, that from Brahman, the whole universe is now manifested. So that is one way that the Shiva Samhita presents. Now, the other thing that it does is that it presents the 3 gunas as and associates that with the deities. But famous, what I call Puranic deities. So there is Tamas, Sattva, Rajas. Some of you may be very familiar. The Triguna, the Trigunya approach is there. And it says that Tamas belongs to Durga and Shiva. Very interesting, right? Sattva belongs to Lakshmi and Vishnu, that combination. And then Rajas belongs to Saraswati and Brahma. This seems to be a very unique contribution of the Shiva Samhita, which you don't see in other places. You don't see it. So this is something very interesting, associating the 3 gunas with the Puranic devatas, the Trimurtis, and their consorts and their patnis. All right, it is there. All right, it's given there. And then some key points of the rest of the chapters, because I'm not going to cover every one in there, but it goes on, like it says that even Ishvara is incomplete. Now, seeing the self through the self, which is a verse that appears in the Bhagavad Gita quite a bit, reference to Samadhi that appears, cultivation of Vairagya, Ishvara being the changeless material and efficient cause, Upadana Karana and Nimitta Karana appears as creation is due to the conjunction of Brahman and ignorance, the interaction of the ignorance and Brahman as Upadi, Panchikarana, etc. And then Adhyaropa Pavada, which I already talked about, and also Maya having the powers of Vikshepa and Avarana Shakti also appears in the later part of the first chapter. Now, other unique features that you see here, you can see a couple of them as already mentioned here. I've put about 10. Some of them I've already discussed. all right, knowledge as a means to mukti, scripture as the pramana for knowing, very clearly it states, usage of nyayas, vivartavada, and Ishvara being the material and efficient cause, world being mithya, the term Satchidananda, the reference to Adhyaropa Pavada, and the mukti gained through the mind. It's a very interesting thing that happens. It's through the mind that you gain it. That is mentioned right here. And the quotes, Upanishad quotes, that also appears. It quotes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, also quotes the Taittiriya Upanishad. That also happens in the Shiva Samhita. Now, let's look at the promotion of Karma Yoga, which is the last part of this talk. Now, the Shiva Samhita, towards the next, in the next chapters, now you realize the first chapter was Navrati Dharma for the sannyasi. And then it moves to Karma Yoga after talking about Hatha Yoga and Tantra aspects. So in chapter 2, it mentions this. Now, it'll be very interesting. It says that the people who desire to cross the samsara, attain moksha, they should follow varnashrama dharma, varna and ashrama, which is a very unique thing in the Vedic traditions, not in the Tantra or the other traditions, in the Hatha Yoga tradition. They don't talk about varnashrama dharma. All right. And then the palavarjam, that means basically to renounce the pala, desire, the fruits of karma, which is samatvam yoga uchyate, that says, and karma pala tyaga, mentioned in chapter 2. So it promotes karma yoga. And then in chapter 5, it goes on and on. In chapter 5, it makes a few interesting points about karma yoga. A householder, the grahastha, now the grahastha comes in. All this while, it has been talking to the sannyasi. Now it is presenting, talking to the grahastha, the householder. So you can see, you can abide at home, and then you just have to, renounce attachment of the body, living attached to the body. And then when you do that, you can get liberated, attain moksha, it says. And then it goes further, right? It says that if you are contented, very nice verse that is here, yadrichala bhasa, yadricha labha santushtaha, it says. Okay, yadricha labha, alabha santushtaha. So whatever that you get, yadricha, that means anything that you get, that is spontaneously, that is there. All right, it is there. You have to be contented, which also talks about samatva, acceptance, whatever that happens. So this is very beautiful. I like this particular line. Yadrichala santushtaha. It beautifully says that this santushtaha, which is very important, contentment that is there. And then through yoga sadhana, And who is this? For the grahastha, it mentions again, for the householder. So if you are contented in any situation and also renounce, all right, attachment, then you can actually attain moksha. And then it goes further. Again, it says, this householder, the karma yogi, have to involve in Ishvara Aradhana, right, which is basically worship. So the worship of God is very important as you are engaged in yoga, which is karma yoga. All right, as you are engaged in karma yoga, the worship of God is there. So again, this is the Ishvara Arpana Buddhi that is found in the Bhagavad Gita. It is mentioned here as the Ishvara Aradhana, which is very important for the karma yogi. And then lastly, the last verse that I want to quote before I close, which is that, look at this very interesting line. It says the grahastha can enjoy in his house full of his wife and sons. Can you believe that? Very interesting contrast that you see now. It now gives license to the householder to now use karma yoga as a means by living in their current life without having to leave. So those of us who are listening to this talk, if you happen to be a grahastha or not a sannyasi, this is how the Shiva Samhita promotes karma yoga right at the end. This is the last few verses of chapter 5, the final chapter, that it says that if you do this, you will attain that moksha very beautifully. So with that, now I'm going to summarize the unique features of chapter 2. So chapter 2, it says in chapter 2, the knowledge as the means to mukti, the Soham Mahavakya also appears in chapter 2. It promotes Varnashrama Dharma that we just saw. And also it promotes Karma Sannyasa when knowledge is gained. So it also says that when once knowledge is gained, you can actually take up sannyasa, which is also called sometimes Vidvat Sannyasa. All right, it's called sometimes Vidvat Sannyasa. And then a couple of 5 other things from chapter 5, what we can see. In chapter 5, when the Vedanta topics, Advaita Vedanta topics appear, it introduces Jnana Yoga and it calls it Rajadhi Raja Yoga, a very interesting 5th yoga. In the chapter 5, there are 4 yogas. All above the 4 yogas, it introduces Rajadhi Raja Yoga, it mentions. And then it talks about Vedanta Yukti, also mentions that, refers to Adhyaropa Apavada as well, mentions again in chapter 5. It quotes Taittiriya Upanishad, and it, just as we saw just now, it teaches Karma Yoga, all right, without using the term for householders, for the sake of Loka Sangraha. Multiple verses are provided in this particular chapter. With that, what is the conclusion? Now, the conclusion is, as you can see, the Shiva Samhita appears to be an awesome text, but it has a kind of a conflict between Jnana Yoga and Hatha Yoga, right? Advaita Vedanta tradition, and as well as Hatha Yoga. There's some conflict because Hatha Yoga belongs to the domain of karmas, but yet it is presented, and then it presents later Karma Yoga as well. How this, perhaps this Hatha Yoga, now listen to this very carefully, how this Hatha Yoga then can be practiced as part of Karma Yoga as in the end. But the first chapter is entirely presenting Jnana Yoga from the standpoint of the Navrati Dharma for those who are sannyasins. So he brings these two Advaita Vedanta approaches, which is Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga for those who are grahasthas or those who are not sannyasis, and Jnana Yoga, which is Nivriti Dharma for those who are sannyasis. And then the Hatha Yoga practices seem to be not completely at ease in the chapter, because there are many points where the Hatha Yoga elements come into conflict with Advaita Vedanta. But yet the Karma Yoga sections come right at the end to try to make up for that so-called disconnection that you see in the Shiva Samhita. And before I end, I would like to also share that the first chapter of the Shiva Samhita is like a Prakarana Grantha, a fundamental Advaita Vedanta text of its own, which can be studied on its own without the dependence of any of the other chapters. It's a fantastic text because, as you can see, I've already shared with you a couple of verses. There are many more. There are 99 verses in this chapter, which can be a very great resource for both teachers who want to teach Vedanta to people, so that they see themselves very clearly to know Brahman by knowing Brahman, or for sadhakas to look at this. You can use this text for manana and nididhyasana after being taught by a teacher, or even to get inspiration. Now, with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'll take questions right now. And this is my contact information, so you can take a snapshot if you would like. If you have you have more questions, or you have clarifications about the text, you can write to me. I'll be happy to respond to it. Thank you. Thank you for patiently listening.
Thank you so much, Kathirasan Ji. It was just great listening to you. You have brought out the entirety of the Shiva Samhita, what is the purpose, how the text has evolved itself through its journey, and what is the core philosophy of the Shiva Samhita itself. It was great listening to you. Viewers, if you have any questions, please post them now. We will be taking up. We are almost out of time. We have 12 more minutes. We will be covering as much as possible. Let us jump directly to the questions. Is there an elaboration or explanation given to the attribution of gunas to Puranic deities in the text?
No, there is no such reference. It just makes a reference without explaining anything about it. So that's why it looks very, very enigmatic in that sense, very unique. No explanation is given.
Okay. And I was listening to your talk and I was just wondering, the author clearly states that the jnana alone can liberate us. And later he also goes on elaborating on Hatha Yoga and so on. And he also speaks about Karma Yoga especially. But the Hatha Yoga tells about the different siddhis that we get after practicing Hatha Yoga. And he also asks us to leave all the fruits. How does he manage to bring those together? What was his idea?
No, he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't. It's the same question that I have even till today, because it's like as if, how this looks like. The chapter 1 is like water, and the rest of the Hatha Yoga content is like oil. They don't mix. They cannot mix. And he doesn't propose anything in the text to bring the two together. It's still like two thumbs sticking out, and they are not connected at all. That is not done in the Shastra. So that's why I say this is left to the Acharya, right? To that guru or Acharya to do this. So that is one license we have. I find comfort in that particular shloka that you find in the Aparoksha Anubhuti. In the text Aparokshanubhuti, right at the end, there's a statement. If you don't understand, it goes like this. If you don't understand what I'm saying about you being Brahman, then go and practice Hatha Yoga.
Okay.
That verse is a very interesting verse. It says, if you don't understand what the Aparokshanubhuti text is, if there is not adequate purification, that means there is not sufficient chitta shuddhi, antakarana shuddhi, then what should you be doing? Hatha Yoga is one of the options available. Not the only option, all right? Varnashrama Dharma also can tackle that, but Hatha Yoga is promoted explicitly in the Aparokshanubhuti. The last verse that you'll find that he says, hey, go and perform Hatha Yoga, the last few verses. So that's one way you can reconcile, That means we don't understand. I make this joke sometimes. After teaching chapter 1, if you don't understand, okay, now go and practice Hatha Yoga.
The only concern that I have is after practicing Hatha Yoga, we maybe sadhaka maybe deviated towards the siddhis that it has to offer, and he forgets the chitta shuddhi that he has to develop. Yeah.
So that's a big problem. I have the same concern as well. But the good news is, if he doesn't see it, then he automatically becomes an anadhikari. So therefore, Vedanta is not necessary for that person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move to the next question. What is the path shown by Shiva Samhita to a sadhaka to move towards the truth? What does it has to offer? A path.
Right. So if you ask the question as a whole, what the Shiva Samhita teaches, then it's a big problem because it teaches many things, right? Because the first chapter teaches primarily Jnana Yoga in the Upanishad tradition. The rest of the chapters, of course, there is a bit of Karma Yoga. Apart from this Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, putting them aside, there is a lot of tantric elements, meditation on the chakras, mudras, performance of mudras, and then there's pranayama, etc. All of them are there. So, but as you know, in Hatha Yoga, there is really no what I call structure, solid structure is not there. So, if you ask me the question, what does Shiva Samhita teach to achieve the truth? The answer is there is no definitive path. But if you're looking for a clear answer in a very coherent manner, in a way that is solid and structured, then it is Jnana Yoga alone that comes in the first chapter. So the first chapter is, as you have already seen, it is really complete and it's very structured and it's very clear. So if you're looking for a clear answer, then it has to be Jnana Yoga. And if you're not eligible for Jnana Yoga, then Karma Yoga and then Jnana Yoga. That's the method.
Okay. And in Vedanta, we see that the Grihastha should perform the karma, and even the Ishavasya Upanishads famously ask, if you want to live for 100 years, perform the karma, the Agnihotradi karma that the Shruti says. And it leads, there is two things for it. That is, one is the getting the other lokas and also for Chitta Shuddhi. Does the Shiva Samhita exactly hold that position? The practicing of Agnihotradi karma will lead to Chitta Shuddhi, or it is for other lokas?
So we can say this to be implicit, not explicit. So because it uses the term Varnashrama karma, right? Agnihotra is part of Varnashrama Dharma karma, actually. It's part of the karma, your smarta karma. It happens. So therefore, it is assumed. So the Shiva Samhita does not explicitly mention, but because it presents karma yoga and in the form of Varnashrama Dharma or Varnashrama karma, therefore this Agnihotra can be performed as part of karma yoga sadhana.
Okay. How does the post Shiva Samhita works look at this? I mean, the entire work as a whole. You mentioned yesterday that the Hatha Yogis consider it as a pure Hatha Yoga text, and the Advaitins consider it as they don't consider it all as a Advaita text. But has any other works of the contemporary acharyas point to the Shiva Samhita work and
No.
shed any light on this?
No, we don't have that. We don't have that evidence yet. At least I've yet to see that. In the Advaita Vedanta literature, it's a completely is in the black, in the area of black darkness. Nobody tends to. That's why I'm very curious. I'm very what I call motivated to get more Advaita Vedanta acharyas to take up the first chapter, because it's a fantastic text. Yeah, you're right. It's total absence. We don't have any reference to it.
I think based on your talk, I can conclude that the Shiva Samhita has been the least explored text as far as it is concerned.
Totally.
Yeah, great. I think this ends our question and answer session and also our two sessions that you gave to us. I think viewers have been really benefited by your talk and your elaboration. I think it was very deeply scholarly presentation that you gave to us. It was not just, the shloka is this, shloka is that, not like that. And you elaborated so well. From the entire team of Advaita Academy, we thank you immensely for appearing on our platform and giving us your knowledge. Viewers, please tune into our evening session at 4 o'clock. Kathirasan ji was mentioning about Atma Are Drashtavyaha Shrotavyaha, and the same principle is being elaborated by Brahma Prakashananda Saraswati ji. Please join us later. And we will be posting this particular recording on Monday or Tuesday on YouTube. You can always access it over there. Thank you so much. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.